We are all the products of the decisions that we and others make every single day of our lives. But some decisions have repercussions that are sometimes so far-reaching that they can affect everybody on the planet. In this video, we've picked out 5 decisions that changed the world. The Cuban Missile Crisis is probably the closest we have come to a nuclear conflict, and many thank Kennedy for facing down the Soviets by blockading Cuba and turning away the Soviet supply ships. But the more important decision was for Kennedy to ignore the advice of General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff. General Curtis LeMay clashed with Kennedy and said that the blockade was a weak political action that would lead to war. He suggested he should be allowed to bomb the Cuban nuclear missile sites, and that would force Moscow to back down instead of facing a nuclear shootout. But what he and others in the US didn't know at the time was that the Soviet field commanders in Cuba had been given authority to launch nuclear weapons independently of Moscow. There were at least 20 nuclear warheads, each with a 1 megaton capability, and medium-range missiles that could reach as far as Washington, as well as 9 tactical nuclear missiles, all stationed on Cuba at that time. This meant that if LeMay had gotten his way and had attacked the missile sites, there was a very high probability that the Soviet commanders would have launched a nuclear attack on the US mainland before Moscow could have reacted. This would have led to millions of US casualties, and the ensuing retaliation by the US Strategic Air Command, again led by LeMay, would have killed upwards of 100 million Soviets. In the end, Kennedy's hunch was right, and the blockade worked. And after secretly removing US missiles from Turkey and Italy, the Soviets backed down and removed their missiles from Cuba. If you celebrate Christmas, or you enjoy having Sunday off of work, then you've got to thank one man almost 1700 years ago for his decision to adopt a minor religion that had been persecuted for almost 200 years, and it's not Jesus Christ. That man was the Roman Emperor Constantine, and his religious conversion took place during the Civil War, when the Roman Empire was effectively in 2 parts, with Constantine coming from Britain in the west and Maxentius ruling the east and holding on to Rome. Christianity back then was a banned religion because, amongst other things, Christians refused to participate in the imperial cult. This cult regarded the Roman emperors and members of their families as gods. Anyone who refused to acknowledge this was committing treason, which was punishable by death. In 312 AD, Constantine was about to fight a key battle in the war and prayed for divine help. Afterwards, he claimed to see a burning cross in the sky, and later that night he dreamt that God told him to use the sign of a cross on his soldiers' shields and on the standard to safeguard all his battles. Constantine defeated Maxentius in the Battle of Milvian Bridge and became the Western Emperor, and continued to wear the cross to safeguard him against his enemies. Constantine became a Christian and became a great patron for Christianity. Shortly after he became emperor, he issued the Edict of Milan, which allowed Christians to freely practice their faith, and he went on to overturn hundreds of years of Roman pagan beliefs. He combined some of the old pagan worship rituals with Christian ones. He made December the 25th, which was the birthday of a pagan sun god, into a celebration of Christ's birth, and thus it became Christmas Day. He also made Sunday an official Roman holiday so people could attend church. He abolished taxes on Christian churches and funded Christian leaders and built new church buildings. By 394 AD, Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire, and the Roman version of Christianity went on to become the hugely powerful Roman Catholic Church, which dominated much of Europe for well over 1,000 years before spreading around the world. It's difficult to say how the world would look if Constantine hadn't become a Christian. But one thing is for certain, without the monolithic power block of the Catholic Church, it would look very different to how it is today. Sometimes the actions of a single man's conscience can make a decision that can affect the future of a whole nation. On September the 11th, 1777, 12,500 British troops had landed on the northern end of Chesapeake Bay and were heading through Pennsylvania towards the Patriot capital of Philadelphia. Guarding their flank and hiding in the woods were a detachment of green-clad British marksmen on the lookout for American forces led by General George Washington. The marksman's commanding officer was Captain Patrick Ferguson, a 33-year-old Scotsman who was said to be the finest shot in the British Army. Ferguson and 3 of his men spotted a cavalry officer dressed in the colourful uniform of a European hussar, followed by a senior American officer wearing a high-cocked hat. They crept forward with the intention of picking off the officers, but then Ferguson had a sudden change of heart and felt disgust at the thought of shooting the officers in the back as they rode by, which would also have been dishonourable in the 18th century. Instead, Ferguson shouted at the men to dismount. They turned to see him and rode off. A few days later, Ferguson was shot in the arm and seriously wounded. It was at this point that he learned that the American officer that he let ride off was most probably General George Washington. Whilst Washington won the war, he was repeatedly outmaneuvered in battles by the British. Had Ferguson shot Washington on that day, it's possible that without Washington at the helm, coordinating the army, Congress, the state governors and their militias and supplies, that the revolution may well have failed and America would have remained a British colony. What could a decision made by a single random person about 6,000 years ago have on the whole of human history? Well, quite a lot, because that one person, be it a man or a woman, was the first to sit and ride on a horse. And that would change the course of human history completely and give us the first transport system that will continue for the next 6,000 years. At the time, horses had been hunted for about 100,000 years for their meat and skin. No one would have imagined that sitting on a 1,000-pound beast that could kill you with a single kick would transform humans from hunter-gatherers that could only travel as far and as fast as they could walk into travellers that would spread across continents and at speeds that would have seemed unbelievable. It allowed human culture to grow from isolated pockets into the interconnected world we have today. It was in the huge Eurasian steppe between Hungary and Mongolia where the first horseman arose some 6,000 years ago. Why someone decided to try and ride a horse for the first time, we will just never know. Humans are often predisposed to doing some pretty weird things, and whether it was just a dare or an idle thought by someone thinking, what would it be like to run as fast as a horse? Whichever way it happened, they managed to tame it and control it. You can only imagine what the other people would have thought when they saw them riding at speed on a horse. And of course, just like today, they all wanted one. It wasn't long before horses started showing up in places like Turkey and Switzerland, well away from the grassy plains of the steppe, and showed the beginnings of the main mode of human transport that would last until the invention of the internal combustion engine almost 6,000 years later. China is now the number 2 power in the world after the United States. But if it weren't for the decision of a new Chinese emperor in 1424, things could have worked out very differently, with China being the first to discover the New World long before the Europeans. We know that Columbus had discovered the New World in 1492, yet over 80 years earlier, the Chinese had created huge treasure fleets, and on 7 occasions between 1405 and 1433, they set out to find new lands and trade. These expeditions were led by the Chinese equivalent of Columbus, a great navigator called Cheng Ha. He created trading links from Taiwan to the Persian Gulf and to the east coast of Africa, all under the control of the Chinese court. They were also a show of force to the barbarian nations that China had once again become the Middle Kingdom of the world. The naval technology was far in advance of that of the Europeans, with the largest vessels, called the treasure ships, being 9-masted junks measuring 400 feet long by 150 feet wide, with 4 decks and watertight bulkheads and a crew complement of over 400. Compare that to Columbus's voyages over 80 years later, where the largest ship, the Santa Maria, was just 90 feet by 30 feet and with a crew of 90. It took the Europeans hundreds of years before they built ships as large as the Chinese treasure ships. Each of the Chinese expeditions consisted of over 300 ships with over 27,000 crew, soldiers, horses, supply ships, water tankers and patrol boats. With all these advantages, the Chinese were ideally placed to colonize the new undiscovered worlds well before the Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese and British, but for the decision of the new Chinese Hongxi Emperor in 1424. Along with him came a new wave of Confucianism. He ordered the overseas voyages to stop as it violated long-standing Confucian principles and the new thinking that the enlightened Chinese had nothing to learn or gain from the barbarians. By 1500, the Chinese fleet was reduced to a fraction of its previous size, and so began the hundreds of years of Chinese isolationism and the colonization of the New World by the Europeans. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please thumbs up, subscribe, share and comment. And don't forget, we have other videos available which you may also find interesting on the link which is showing now. So until the next time, it's goodbye from me.